for a Grand Prix that I have ever seen in the whole of my life. He's out of the race! He's out of the race! Oh my goodness, this is fantastic! And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
The Spanish Grand Prix has been and gone, and with it, Lewis Hamilton has taken his 98th Grand Prix victory and his 100th pole position. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Maximum Downforce, the official Downforce Radio Formula One show. Joining me, as always, Topher Smith, and joining us is Ryan Ferris and Jenny Lieberman. So, guys, the Formula One race in Spain, we all expected it to be, not going to lie, pretty bad, because as Spain is quite often quite a boring Grand Prix, I was actually quite surprised to see it throw up some strategy, intrigue, some good overtaking manoeuvres, especially from Sergio Perez on Daniel Ricciardo. Let's just get stuck into it. Jenny, what was your thoughts on the Grand Prix weekend?
Well, it was a Spanish Grand Prix that I actually found exciting. I was really pleasantly surprised, actually. Obviously, it's still Spain, so there's only so much intrigue you can really get. But no, I thought the strategy battle up front, you had team orders at Mercedes, the Ferraris looked fast again. I mean, it was a really good race. I was very pleasantly surprised. How about the rest of you guys?
Yeah, I thought it was quite a good Grand Prix as well, all things considered. I mean, it wasn't amazing, but as far as the Spanish Grand Prix goes, that was pretty amazing because yeah, as already said, it's usually quite a snore fest when it comes to the Spanish Grand Prix, but it managed to somewhat deliver.
I did enjoy it. It was one of the more enjoyable Spanish Grand Prix we've seen for a very long time. But I'm still not sure if I'd call it a classic, personally. We did have this great strategic battle that happened between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. You had the one-stop strategy versus a two-stop strategy. It kept you interested in the Grand Prix. Although I still wouldn't really put it in the category of classics. It wasn't really that exciting for me. It was more intriguing than anything, I think might be the best way I can put it. Yeah, not every race can be a classic. Not every race is going to be edgy of his seat, exciting all of the time. So it was just one of those races where we don't necessarily have the greatest track available at Circuit de Catalunya, but the drivers made the most out of it and they produced this great strategic battle, which ultimately I think Lewis Hamilton did deserve to win.
So Lewis Hamilton was first and Max Verstappen just finished up behind him in second place, taking the fastest lap point. With it, Valtteri Bottas was in third, with Charles Leclerc following him in fourth, with Sergio Perez unable to back his teammate up in fifth place. Daniel Ricciardo took his best race for McLaren with sixth, with Carlos Sainz Jr. in seventh. Lando Norris scored McLaren's fourth double points finish of 2021 in eighth, with Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, the two Frenchmen, rounding out the points finishes. So, guys, like I said earlier, Lewis Hamilton, 100th pole position. We saw from Canada 2007 to Spain 2021. He has been immense on a qualifying run. He's really took it upon himself to perform in qualifying more and more. We saw in 2014 especially, Nico Rosberg was the man who was taking lots of pole positions, Topher. But Hamilton really did turn it around, and now 100 pole positions. What an achievement for him.
I mean, it's just an incredible stat, isn't it? He's the first driver in Formula One history to hit triple digits when it comes to pole positions, and I'm sure pretty soon he's going to hit triple digits in race wins as well. It's completely unprecedented, isn't it? I remember when Lewis Hamilton first came into Formula One, we knew that he was special. We knew that he was a Formula One world champion in waiting. But did we really expect him to hit the heights that he has achieved? If you think back to the days of Michael Schumacher, for example, when he took 91 victories and 7 world championships, everyone expected that to be unbeatable. No one thought anyone was ever going to get anywhere near him. But Lewis Hamilton, since he's joined Mercedes, he's really helped that team get onto the game that they're on at the moment and made it into the dominant force that they are. I mean, obviously, it's not just Lewis Hamilton. There's all of the mechanics, there's the engineers, there's the designers, there's everyone at the factory. Everyone's working together to make Mercedes the absolute unit that it is. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, it is down to the driver to then go and complete the job. All of the work of the mechanics, the engineers, that's most of the job. The final piece of the puzzle is putting it out on track, getting the lap times, getting the race wins, getting the championships. And Lewis Hamilton 100 pole positions. It's just completely unprecedented, like I said. And I didn't think that, at least in my lifetime, I didn't think I'd ever see anyone hit triple digits on any sort of stat like that. Obviously, we've had some drivers reach triple digits in podiums, but when it comes to race victories and what has been achieved now in pole positions, I don't think there's enough superlatives to describe his career. We thought he might get 1 or 2 championships when he first started out, but for him to get 7, possibly on the way to 8 now, and reach triple digits in poles and probably going to reach triple digits in wins as well. Yeah, what more can I say, really?
And Jenny, obviously, the man fighting him today was Max Verstappen, and the race reminded everyone a lot of Hungary 2019. Do you think there was anything that Red Bull could have done to outmaneuver Mercedes in terms of strategy?
I mean, I can't say I wasn't disappointed when they mention Hungary 2019, and everyone knows how that turned out. So I was a bit disappointed not to see them try something there. It would have been a bit more exciting, got us on the edge of our seats if maybe, a lap after Hamilton pits, you see Verstappen pitting and fighting him to get back up to the top again. I don't know, I just think in that moment there was a little bit of a, well, we know how Hungary 2019 worked out, so why not try something new? Why not change it up a bit? It seemed Max on those tyres at that point. Personally, as soon as Hamilton pitted, it was kind of over, as far as I was aware, as far as I was thinking.
When Hamilton came into the pits for a second pit stop, I was basically screaming at the TV, calling for Max to go and cover him off. And when it became apparent that Max wasn't going to do so, I just knew in that moment he's lost this Grand Prix. Because Hamilton, he also has this ability to make the tyres turn on very quickly when he needs it. So as soon as he's out of the pits, He got his tyres up to temperature, and he was on it. He caught up to the back of Max so quickly. And the whole time I was just thinking, why did Max not pit to cover him off? If he had have done, he might have fallen behind Lewis Hamilton initially through Hamilton getting the undercut, but then he could have battled him for the victory. We might have even had an even more exciting Grand Prix had Verstappen come into the pits and actually made a fight of it on fresher rubber as well. I just think by Red Bull not coming in to cover off Hamilton's pit stop, they deprived us of what could have been a great battle for the victory.
See, the only counterpoint you can put towards that is the fact that Max Verstappen did not actually have a fresh set of medium tyres. I'm not entirely sure whether he had a scrub set or a less worn set, but even still, that is a possible reason that Red Bull could have not boxed him.
As a possible reason, yes, but is it better to have however many lap-old tyres on mediums than have a completely new set of maybe hard tyres? So don't forget, at that point, Max had already been on his tyres for quite a long time, and they were starting to get worn. So maybe they could have taken a gamble to put him onto a set of harder tyres. Yeah, they are the harder tyres, they're not as fast, but they would have been fresher, so maybe he could have still got the speed out of them. It's one of those hypotheticals that we won't know now, but still, I think when he's trying to make the tyres go for that long into the race, of course he's going to lose out. The tyres just don't really last the distance anymore, so I don't really buy too much into that argument personally, because if they're old tyres, it doesn't matter whether they're soft, medium or hard. They're still old tyres, they're still worn, you're not going to be able to extract the maximum out of them.
Also, if we're saying that the issue was that Max didn't have fresh tyres, then could we go into saying that potentially Red Bull just hadn't done their strategy in as good a way as Mercedes? So the 3-stop ended up being the fastest, as we saw with Hamilton. Should Red Bull have considered a 3-stop strategy from the start?
I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. When you look back on it with hindsight, it was a strategic battle which decided that race, and ultimately Mercedes, as you said, Jenny, did just play it better.
And hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Oh, yes.
So, moving on from the first drivers to the second drivers, Ryan, Valtteri Bottas was absolutely nowhere during the Spanish Grand Prix, but we've spent so much time focusing on why Bottas is slow and why Bottas isn't at the front. The team orders that Mercedes gave him let's face it, they were blatant team orders to get out of Lewis's way. He really didn't want to move out of Hamilton's way. He ended up holding him up on the straight through turn 8, turn 7, turn 9, and eventually Hamilton had to make a competitive overtake through into turn 10 to get past his teammate.
Well, I think he's getting a bit fed up with the whole team orders thing. I think a lot of people have reminded him too much of the race at Sochi, which was that 2019 when he had to move to 2018 when he had to move to let Hamilton through. And I think he's now got to the point that he just doesn't want to be playing the team game as much as he is, especially this early into the season, when in his mind he's still got the potential to be fighting for championships. So I think in his mind he wants to be fighting against Lewis to score the maximum points he can. So I think this early into the season using team orders, I think it hurts him a little bit.
And on the other side of Mercedes, we take a look at Red Bull, Jenny. And once again, Sergio Perez proving that Red Bull may have developed a bit of a difficult car. It's either that, obviously, he's brand new to the team, brand new to this high rake philosophy. But even still, he needs to be backing up Max Verstappen in these Grand Prix. And Verstappen got flanked by the Mercedes. The two of them working together. Verstappen's one-handed in this situation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a big part of Red Bull's strategy problems is the fact that they're only strategizing really with one car up at the front while Mercedes have two. Ultimately, if Perez had been right behind Bottas, then there wouldn't have been this same window that made the game wide open for strategy for Mercedes in terms of just getting Max out of the way, really. Perez, I wouldn't say that it looks like Perez is struggling as much as Gasly and Albon, but I would say it looks like Perez is struggling. And it does seem to be indicating that Red Bull really have built this car around Max, and you can completely understand why they've done it. They've invested a lot into Max. They want to make him the youngest world champion. He's got talent. No one's denying that. But Red Bull now have a problem. They've now had 3 drivers, and Sergio is proven. He is a proven race winner already, and he is a seasoned driver. And even he is struggling. So were we all too harsh on Gasly, Albon? Well, Red Bull Racing too harsh on Gasly and Albon, not giving them enough of a shot in a car that ultimately is so specifically around one person's driving style. I mean, you can't really say that Max is out driving the car and Perez isn't, because it's physics. You can't really outdrive a car. Max suits that car, he's sailing away in it. And it's sad to see, because I just think Perez is going to take a little bit longer than someone like Carlos Sainz getting used to that Ferrari. He seems to have gotten in and sailed away. Perez clearly needs a bit more time, and I think he can get there still. He's a proven driver. He's absolutely awesome on track, overtaking, coming from the back of the grid. He's going to be great if he can get used to that car. What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, realistically, Sergio Perez is a driver who has proved himself to be effective in all the machinery that he's been given. He scored podiums and race wins in a Force India or a Racing Point. He gets the job done at the end of the day. He just needs a bit more consistency in that car. And unfortunately, just a bit more pace. He needs to get used to it. And with Monaco coming up, we'll get onto that shortly. Monaco is a circuit which Red Bull expect to do well at. In the history of Red Bull, they have always performed at the circuit when Mercedes haven't been dominating. So Perez needs to pick up the pace quickly, and unfortunately, it may even need to be done before the next race. Anyway, stepping away from the racing, and we take a look at the graphics, Ryan. The FIA and Formula One have always been trying to push in new graphics in the sport. AWS, the qualifying pace, the race pace, the cornering speed, the braking speed. Most of it, let's face it, can be pretty useless. But they've actually incorporated something for the team radio. We saw Toto Wolff and Michael Massey communicate between each other. And obviously, Toto Wolff very vocal that Nikita Mazepin wasn't getting out of the way for blue flags, which, let's face it, has been a story we've become accustomed to in recent recent races. But it's good for the fans. It gives them a new window in order to see the behind the scenes, like Drive to Survive. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I find it a bit amusing that the first time we actually see this appear, it relates to Nikita Mazepin, and yeah, I don't know if it's now, the Formula One itself just almost pointing at, look, this is Mazepin. People are complaining about him again. But yeah, it would be interesting if they actually start using this across the board, with all the teams, about all sorts of things. But I just found it quite amusing that it was used in the situation it was used, when there's probably been multiple situations where it could have been used before.
There was even a case during the Grand Prix with Pierre Gasly getting a penalty for being out of his grid spot. We could have heard something there, Jenny.
Yeah, we could have. I think, like Ryan says, it does kind of feel like it's Formula One saying, listen, we're not happy with him either. There's so much on social media and online about people not being happy about Nikita Mazepin being in this sport, both in terms of the personal side of things, and now we're seeing on track he's not exactly one of the real racers, I suppose you could say nicely. I think it was to prove a point more so than showing off a new graphic. That's my take on it, at least. It seemed like a bit of an odd way to introduce a new thing, but very much needed, just to reassure people, because obviously the Nikita Mazepin stuff was all handled by Haas in the background, not in the public eye. So we're all seeing the complaints about blue flags and him getting in the way or spinning. This felt like Formula One's way of reassuring fans and viewers that they're aware and they're not just completely writing it off, perhaps.
And Topher, you've seen plenty of different graphic packages and different layouts for Formula One on your TV. Do you agree with the comments made, or do you feel that it is purely for the aesthetic and purely to give fans an open window?
Well, one of the things that Formula One has been trying to do for the past few years is to make the sport more accessible to its fans. And we've seen that in many different ways. So they've re-established themselves, especially since Liberty Media took over. So, for example, we've now got fans voting for the driver of the day, for example. Bringing in the team radio, now when they talk to the FIA, I think is just another step in that. The comments that were being made just now about it being a little bit convenient, let's say, that it was about Mazepin, who's been very much under the spotlight recently. I don't buy completely into the fact that it's done almost to show up Mazepin. I think it's one of those things that Formula One has been considering for quite a long time, because we know that it's possible to have the team radio from when the drivers speak to their engineers and we can hear what they're saying. So this, is, to me anyway, is just that next step where we can now hear the team principals talking to the race director. And I think it's an absolutely great addition to the graphics package that we've got. So we hear all the time about team principals and making complaints to Charlie Whiting back in the day, now Michael Massey. They're not happy with a driver who's not getting out of the way under blue flags. And it's just a way that you can make this more accessible to fans. Like, we're told about it, but now they can actually hear it for themselves and actually hear like the urgency in the voice, if you like. When we heard Toto Wolff saying it, you could very clearly hear the annoyance in his voice as he was calling Michael Massey. It was absolutely great for the fans to hear that, because it's another, like I said, it's another step into the behind the scenes aspects of Formula One. And I'm all for it being introduced. I just hope that we see it in more races in the future.
And obviously, with this new package, who knows what could be implemented in Formula One. Let us know at Downforce Radio on our social media, or if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section, what you believe Formula One will take in its next steps to build the window for fans. Anyway, back to the racing now, Ryan. Daniel Ricciardo, is he finally back? We've seen him finally perform in the McLaren. He was fighting off Sergio Perez for quite a margin of that Grand Prix. I think 50 laps something along those lines. A really good performance for the Australian.
Yeah, I think his main problem that he had is getting the grips with the car in qualifying, as he wasn't 100% sure where the limit was when pushing it during qualifying. But then we saw in Portimao that he fought his way through the pack brilliantly, and this time he managed to get the qualifying done, out-qualified his teammate Norris, and yeah, managed to keep it well up there, fighting up with Perez for most of the race until eventually Perez managed to get past him. It'll be interesting to see how he does at Monaco, because Monaco is a track that Ricciardo does like. So I'm expecting more good things to come from Ricciardo after this weekend.
And Jenny, obviously, McLaren are a team who've done very well this season. They're currently third in the championship standings with Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo. Do you think with Daniel Ricciardo finally up there, they can keep on building a lead from Ferrari in the current battle for third place that they're locked into right now?
Personally, I think we're going to see this fight between McLaren and Ferrari for third continue throughout most of the season. I think they've both got strong lineups. They've both got the balance of a seasoned driver who knows the team and a new driver who is a clear talent in both Ricciardo and Sainz. I'd say so far it looks like Sainz has edged Ricciardo a little bit in terms of settling into the car and settling into the team there. But Ricciardo showed us this weekend that he's coming back, he's getting used to that car, and he'll be fighting. I think it's going to be a really good battle between these two teams and these four drivers. I think before this season, I was looking at the four of them. I reckon they'll be in succession in the Drivers' Championship this year. And I think we're in for a really exciting one. All strong drivers with something to prove this year, whether it's proving they're faster than their teammate or simply just that they are as good as they are rumoured to be. Yeah, I think the two teams will give us a good show this year.
And Topher, Ferrari have done a pretty good job so far this season. They're fourth in the championship, a much better beginning to than their 2020 campaign. Do you think if Leclerc and Sainz especially can keep on building on this relationship that they've got at Ferrari, the harmonious relationship and the pace that they're showing off with their car, could they beat McLaren?
That's a very good question. Because Ferrari, as you say, they very clearly improved. They're having one of their best starts to a season for quite a while now. But don't forget, McLaren are also having one of their best starts to the season for a while. So they're both developing at a very impressive rate, and they're both getting on top of the machinery that they've got. And also, arguably, two of the strongest driver lineups in Formula One. We've got Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren, and Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz at Ferrari. I remember back to the good old days of Ferrari versus McLaren, when there was the likes of Michael Schumacher and Mika Häkkinen fighting with each other. And of course, at that time, it was for the World Championship and for race victories. It's not necessarily going to be for race victories this time around. I still reckon they might be able to get one or two across the course of the season. But in terms of their battle against each other, I reckon it's going to be one of the highlights of the season. It's so difficult to predict who's going to be on top out of those two come the end of the season. So, I'm just trying to... I'm looking at the points here. McLaren currently on 65 points and Ferrari on 60. There's only 5 points between them after the first 4 rounds of the championship. It's absolutely fantastic to see the battle that's going on between them at the moment. And we've had the on-track battles between them as well. In Imola, we had battles between Norris and Leclerc, for example. And it's so fascinating just thinking that we're finally, once again, going to get Ferrari versus McLaren. It is a little bit of a shame that it's not for the championship, as it was in what I like to call the good old days, the days where I was growing up watching Formula One. Just showing my age a little bit there. But it's absolutely fantastic to see that both of those teams are on the way back up again. A lot of it is also going to, as far as the future is concerned, a lot of it's going to depend on how each team adapts to the regulation changes as well. Because both teams, they've had an upward trend in the past couple of seasons. They're both getting back on top of their cars. and getting back in the battle again. But don't forget, we've got this major regulation change coming in for 2022, which has the potential to shake up the pecking order. Will they continue even further on that upward trajectory when we go through the regulation change? I don't know, and it's really fascinating to not know, because it just keeps you interested, it keeps you thinking, oh, what's going to happen? I really want to know what's going to happen, So Ferrari beating McLaren beating Ferrari. Ask me at the end of the season.
Now, stepping away from modern Formula One to my favourite segment of the show, On This Day, where we look at different events throughout Formula One's history on the specific day of recording. Today we're recording on May 12th. In 2002, we were just talking about Ferrari as well, so this matches up perfectly. 2002, the Austrian Grand Prix. And obviously, immediately, I think you can all know where we're going. It was the fight between Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello, where Rubens Barrichello let Michael Schumacher through on the final lap, on the final straight, with meters to go. Topher, I'm sure obviously you remember that pretty well, given your age.
I don't want to get too involved in that, but that was one of the most shambolic acts by any Formula One team in history. I mean, we accept team orders as a part of Formula One now, but when you do it that blatantly and that close to the end of it for a race victory, that was just not on.
So my question to you three today is, in 2008, Rubens Barrichello came out and explained the reason why he handed over the position. Can you tell me the reason why, and the reason he gave specifically?
I remember the reason that he gave at the time. They had the press conference after the race, and the reason that he gave was that he just signed a contract extension with Ferrari, and he believed that in order to respect the team and pay back their faith in him, he should do what they asked him to. Simple as that. I'm not sure what reason he gave in 2008, but that was the reason that he gave at the time in the aftermath of the event.
Ryan?
Well, I wouldn't know if it would be something like because that was to get the championship sewn up for Schumacher. I didn't know if it was the fact that he'd potentially know that Schumacher would be decent enough to repay the favour, which he somewhat did at Indianapolis. But yeah, I think it was possibly because Rubens maybe thought that he'd have the favour repaid to him.
I was pretty sure, because I remember it being something slightly controversial. I was pretty sure it was something along the lines of him actually going so far as to say that the organisation had threatened to end his racing career, or threatened to, they had specifically threatened to pull his contract if he didn't comply with team orders. That was my thought on it.
Well, you can think that, and you are actually right, Jenny. It was because he thought that Ferrari would fire him, and apparently there was even some team radio communication which suggested the idea. He came out and said that while driving for Honda in 2008. So thank you very much for taking your guesses at that. So now we can go back to the Spanish Grand Prix. Alpine, Topher, what happened to their pace during the Grand Prix?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Will. I was very impressed with Esteban Ocon in qualifying, especially. He put it fifth on the grid. And Alpine and also Renault in the last few seasons, they've had their flashes of brilliance here and there, but not really consistently. But to me, it seems like Alpine is starting to actually get on top of things. And Ocon, he did a fantastic job in qualifying. Like I said, he put it P5 on the grid. Fernando Alonso, he was also in the top 10 as well, qualified in 10th, but ended up finishing a lap down in 17th position. So, yeah, as for the race pace, I don't have an answer for you. Sometimes you can get some instances where they manage to get one lap completely hooked up, but then in the race pace can't really get the consistency out of it. I like to call that the Arno Trulli syndrome. So absolutely brilliant over one lap, but then the race pace can be somewhat lacking. So It can be any number of factors, really. It could be the use of the tyres, maybe. It could be their pit stop strategy. There's so many mitigating factors when it comes to Formula One, and I think it might just be a simple case of they just didn't have the race pace. Simple as that.
Kenny, do you think that Alpine would prefer to have some points on the Grand Prix but show their pace in qualifying, or do you think they prefer a much more worse qualifying to score bigger points in the race?
I think any team would be mad not to say that they want the points on Sunday. The points on the board is what matters at the end of the championship. I think we'd be fools not to assume that Alpine are a bit disappointed with their start to this season. I mean, that midfield battle at the end of last season was amazing. I don't know about you guys, but I was absolutely living for it. And I really thought we'd show up to this season and we'd see still Alpine and Aston Martin up there with those McLarens. But they haven't quite been there. I think Alpine can be glad with their showing in qualifying. That was great to see Ocon qualifying P5. But ultimately, it's those points that they want. And especially in a season like this, where so far it's been 4 teams taking the majority of the points, with the AlphaTauris and Alpine scrapping away for those last couple. I think Alpine really needs to hook it up in the race now and start holding on to those positions. Watching Alonso fall in those last couple laps was really sad, but by the end of that race, it looked like the tyres on those cars were just... The car was not kind to those tyres by the end of the race, which is when we saw Alonso just completely fall out of contention for that P10 point, down to P17, was it? P16, P17, ultimately not where we'd expect to see Fernando Alonso in the Alpine. They'll get there. I think we've seen them improve, and I reckon they'll have just enough upgrades just to get back up to a bit more consistency. But yeah, overall, not their best weekend and not their best start to a season.
Now, Ryan, Aston Martin, like Jenny just said, were involved in a huge scuffle for the final points-paying position of P10, eventually being won by Pierre Gasly, as mentioned earlier. But the season just hasn't gone the way they wanted, with the new regulations affecting their low-rate concept that they adopted from Mercedes in 2019. Do you think they'll switch focus to 2022 in the coming weeks?
Well, I'm kind of almost as confused as everyone as to what has happened with the Aston Martin this season. It was kind of a bit like Alpine over the weekend. During the practice sessions, they were on the pace during the practice sessions, and then it kind of just fell apart in the race. And obviously Vettel got the brand new aero package this weekend, and during the practice sessions it all looked very positive. It just seems race pace just isn't there. And for Gasly to have his 5-second penalty for his being out of place on the on the start line, to then come through and then nick that point off of them, it's just, it's just not acceptable. And yeah, there has to come a point where Aston Martin have got to think, that we're not going to manage what we want this season. We need to shift focus to next season.
Now, Topher, Aston Martin had big ambitions this year, as did many other teams. But I read a report, I can't remember who came out and said it, but someone believes that Aston Martin and Lawrence Stroll's backfire of adopting a 2019 Mercedes to make advantage of the 2021 regulations, or what was supposed to be the 2021 regulations, actually demoralized the team. How do you respond?
Again, that is a good question. I don't think there's any lack of morale within that team. So don't forget, at the tail end of last season, they took a Grand Prix victory at the hands of Sergio Perez. So that team came into 2021 thinking, we know how to win races, now let's try and capitalize on it. It hasn't quite gone the way that they might have planned, but I kind of feel as though that Aston Martin coming in may have slightly underestimated the demands of Formula One. So obviously it's still more or less the same team of mechanics, the same team of engineers. But when you come in as a brand as huge as Aston Martin, the atmosphere is going to change within the team and the expectations are going to change within the team. I'm not going to put that down to morale, as you suggested, Will. I'm just going to put it down to the fact that it's a bit of a change of ethos, a change of atmosphere, as I said. And when they're trying to get on top of the car like that, when you're under new management, things are going to be operating in a bit of a different way. So I think it was Jake who mentioned in a previous podcast that when it comes to the difference between a manufacturer team and a privateer team, a manufacturer team, such as Aston Martin, sometimes they tend to think a bit more as a business unit. Whereas when you have a privateer team like Racing Point was and Force India before them, they think more like a Formula One team. Now, when you're a manufacturer, obviously you have the money to back that up. With Racing Point, they didn't have the biggest budgets in the world, but they had the correct mentality to race in Formula One, and ultimately they were rewarded with a Grand Prix victory in Sakir. With Aston Martin coming on board, like I said, it's sort of changed the atmosphere within the team a bit. It's becoming a little bit more business-like, a little bit more corporate, which I think maybe on a subconscious level at least is potentially affecting the way that they go about their business. That's not to take anything away from the engineers and the mechanics at all. They all still operate to a fantastic level. But when you consider what they're up against with some of the other teams on the grid as well, the likes of Mercedes, the likes of Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren, they're all improving their own game as well. They're all getting better. And when push comes to shove, you are going to get some teams that will ultimately lose out because of that. Everyone's developing at the same time, but not everyone can go forward. Sometimes the team has to fall back a bit. And at the moment, that team is Aston Martin. I think potentially they could now look more towards the 22 regulation changes. I don't think they're going to get the results that they want in 21. So they've got points here and there. They might get a podium, depends if there's an attritional race or not. But in terms of challenging for race victories and championship battles, I think they're better off looking at the new regulation changes.
Now, Jenny, AlphaTauri, it was a poor day at the office for them in terms of what they would have preferred. Pierre Gasly, when lining up on the grid, was too far forward in his grid slot and ended up getting a 5-second penalty, which he had to serve in the pit stops. Luckily, he actually managed to score a point at the end of the race after fighting with the likes of Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso, as well as Sebastian Vettel. But on the other hand, they would have expected more from this weekend, especially with the pace that they have shown in recent Grand Prix. And overall, the season just hasn't gone their way.
Yeah, I think, as you say, just a bad day at the office for AlphaTauri. Ultimately, Yuki Tsunoda, his car switched off. Pierre Gasly got the 5-second penalty for starting over the line in his box. So disappointing, because those two are, I see them as sort of some of the people who can shake up the grid a little bit. You never really know where they're going to be, so they throw in an element of surprise and jeopardy. Sometimes they are so on that pace and they're up there. You'll see Gasly fighting with the McLarens and the Ferraris. And Tsunoda, for a rookie, he's fast. He does need to dial back a little bit on the aggression, perhaps. I think he almost seems to be driving a little bit too enthusiastically sometimes, which is great. And we've seen someone like Max Verstappen came in and he was crashing a little bit here and there. He wasn't always on it. And look at him now. So I think there's huge potential still. But yeah, I mean, it's small little things where if AlphaTauri can just pull it in, I think they'll be up there and they'll be a good team to watch. But yeah, they just need to screw a few extra screws that are just a little bit loose and get the strategy down and not make any silly mistakes, ultimately.
And Ryan, like you said earlier when we were discussing the race before recording the podcast, Yuki Tsunoda, he's got a bit of a potty mouth at the minute. He likes swearing. I imagine that if he took languages for some of his education, he was the kid who immediately went and found out all the swear words of the language he was studying. Because the way he's responded to the team in terms of he's not very nice to them. And obviously he is young. He's only just turned 21. So I think people do need to cut him a bit of slack. But he also needs to learn that in Formula One, you need to watch what you say.
Well, yeah, especially when everything you say gets broadcasted to everyone else. And I think it's now getting to the point where the team are not taking his words too kindly, that he says when the car's not going the way it is. I think they would rather prefer that he keeps himself to himself when he's in the car and says how he feels when he's behind closed doors, away from everyone else to hear, sort of thing. Yeah, I just think the Toro Rosso, or not the Toro Rosso, the AlphaTauri, it's kind of been a little bit of a disappointment now we've came into the season, because they look so strong in pre-season testing that it almost looked like they were the real deal and they had managed to find something over the course of the winter, but they seem to be struggling now that the season's begun. Obviously, they had strong performances in Bahrain, but yeah, it seems if Yuki carries on the way he is, bad mouthing the car and the team, is there a risk that he may not be here come next season if he doesn't find his performance that he had in pre-season testing and doesn't keep himself quiet at times? I don't know.
And realistically, that is just the question we have to ask. Is Yuki Tsunoda going to be in the seat if he keeps on demoralizing the team at this rate?
I'll just jump in quickly and just say I think he might be in trouble with the team, to be honest, because he made the mistake of implying that he and Pierre might even have different cars. That's not something you go out and say publicly about your team. He's since gone and retracted his statement and made an apology to the team for his comments. But a certain level of maturity is needed in order to keep respect that you need in order to be a Formula One driver. We've seen that drivers don't last long unless they are well liked, as well as putting in those by the right people, of course, as well as putting in those performances.
At the end of the day, you've got to keep your mouth clean in Formula One and show a bit of, show that you're being grown up, essentially. And one driver who has shown that he is growing up rather quickly and becoming more and more experienced, Topher, Mick Schumacher. He had a fantastic... Obviously, we didn't really see him much over the weekend. Namely, we saw him getting lapped by the Mercedes and the Red Bulls. But he had a really strong weekend.
Yeah, definitely. Mick Schumacher, he seems to be growing into the series a lot more than the other rookies are at the moment. As we said with Yuki Tsunoda, he's very clearly capable, but maybe just has a little bit of growing up to do, which I'm sure will come with time. Mick Schumacher, you don't see him complaining, you don't see him rocking the boat. He's just trying to do the better he can with the machinery he's been given. And we saw it in Portimao as well, when he had the battle with Nicholas Latifi at Williams. He's really settling into the car that he's got underneath him, which, let's all be honest, it's a bit of a dog of a car, isn't it? But he's not complaining at all. He's working the best with what he's got. And he's showing that he's not only a very capable driver, but he's also a very professional and mature driver. When you think about Formula One drivers and the longevity of their careers, you could have all the natural talent in the world. You could be one of the fastest in the world. But if you don't have the attitude that goes with it, then you're going to rub people up the wrong way. And it might burn some bridges when it comes to finding potential employees in the future. Employers in the future. Always get mixed up between those two. So Mick Schumacher, like I said, he hasn't really complained at all. The Haas car is pretty awful this season. But I think it's fairly clear that he is thinking long-term. I think he knows that he might potentially in for a bit of a long Formula One career. So he's playing the long game. He's thinking long-term. He knows he's not going to set the world alight this season. He's thinking more towards the future. How can he build up into being potentially one of the best drivers on the grid? So I think he's probably accepted that he's going to have a very below par season this year as far as championship points is concerned, but he's still doing a fantastic job with the machinery at his disposal. And him being able to fight with the likes of Nicholas Latifi and trying to get up past the back of the field, it's absolutely fantastic to see what he is doing. And if he can do that on a consistent basis, maybe he could get moved up to a midfield team or maybe even a top team sooner than we'd think.
And that is how the best Formula One drivers start their career. Senna in a Tolman, Schumacher in a Jordan, and Alonso in a Minardi. So I think that's everything for the Spanish Grand Prix, other than one thing that I do want to discuss with you guys, and that is the circuit itself. The circuit Barcelona de Catalunya has caused some distaste from the Formula One community in terms of it's not the best circuit in the world, and it's not the easiest to overtake on. Now, my personal opinion on the situation is that we shouldn't judge circuits until the new regulations come next year, because hopefully the cars will find it easier to follow. They'll find it easier to overtake around the circuit. Hopefully the cars will be a bit smaller. But if we start with Jenny, then go to Ryan, and then finish with Topher, what do you think is necessary to make this circuit work?
Quite simply, get rid of that last chicane. It just, it's so frustrating. Lando Norris's qualifying lap in Q1 getting ruined at that last chicane by a mass of drivers who were already sort of queuing up, slowing down there in order to get their laps in. It's just difficult. And in the race, you see them cut their speed, and I think it's the turn after that was redone and revamped, and so that the drivers could carry more speed around it. But with that chicane, they slow down so much that there's only so much speed that they end up building up in order to carry around. I love watching cars go fast. I can't deny it. I love a high-speed corner. And that last chicane just is not it. But like you say, I do think there is something to be said for not judging the tracks until we see the new cars in the new regs and how they manage.
Well, the thing is, it's all right saying about the chicane, but I think the whole idea behind the chicane is to try and concertina the pack back up, rather than just having one effectively long right-hander that is the last two corners if we took the chicane out. I feel like if you just took the chicane out, there'd be even less opportunity for overtaking, because you haven't got that chicane to try and bring everyone back together and put people back into DRS contention. It's just a tough track really to do much improvement to. Obviously, MotoGP they don't use the chicane. But then also the other thing is, if you don't use the chicane and use the long old Grand Prix layout, is there enough runoff for an F1 car? Because obviously they'll be coming into that corner at a lot higher speeds than they would if the chicane's there.
Would you like my completely honest opinion about the Circuit de Catalunya?
I always want your honest opinion, Topher.
Get rid of it. Like, genuinely, I'm not a fan of it at all. I think it's a good testing circuit. I'd be more than happy to have pre-season testing there on a regular basis, because it's got a good mix of high-speed corners, low-speed corners, technical section at the end with the chicane. So it's a good test bed for the teams to try different things within pre-season testing. But in terms of it being a racetrack, it's one of my least favourite in the world. It hardly ever produces exciting racing. The only race that I can remember being really invested in at that track recently that wasn't a wet race was 2012, where we had Pastor Maldonado winning. And it still wasn't a classic race in terms of the outright action. But the thing that kept that interesting was the fact that we had a midfield team that was winning a race on pure merit. When it comes to just as a race circuit, cars racing each other, I really don't like it. I think Spain does have its place on the Formula One calendar, like especially with Fernando Alonso coming back and also now having Carlos Sainz at Ferrari as well. but I don't think that Catalonia is the right place for it to go racing. If it was down to me, I wouldn't mind having Formula One back at Jerez, actually. So Jerez, it has some more overtaking opportunities. It has a much better flow to the circuit. And if we're moving into the 22 regulations where we have cars that will be able to follow each other a lot more closely and potentially create more overtaking opportunities, I think Jerez is so much better for that than Catalonia. We were talking about this within the Downforce chat that we've got between ourselves. And there are a few different suggestions being thrown around. Ricardo Tormo was mentioned as well. I think Ricardo Tormo would be all right, but all right at best. But Jerez was mentioned as well. I think someone also mentioned the re-emergence of Mondrian Park, if that's possible to bring back that one. But yeah, when it comes down to the Circuit de Catalunya, it's a good testing circuit, no doubt, but it's not a very good racing circuit. That's my opinion anyway. People can agree or disagree all they want, but in my own personal opinion, I would not be unhappy to see that track drop off the calendar.
And unfortunately, that is all we have time for. We have covered everything from this week's Spanish Grand Prix. So thank you very much, Topher, Ryan and Jenny, for joining me in this week's episode of Maximum Downforce. And thank you very much to all of you who have listened at home. Remember to check out our socials at Downforce Radio on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube, as well as our radio station, downforceradio.uk, where you can listen to the best songs in the charts and also get some of the best news from our articles. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in Monaco.
Go, go, go! Anytime and immediately! This is amazing! The worst start for a Grand